The Zarak Empire's warships tore through the skies of Earth like a swarm of locusts, laying waste to everything in their path. Humanity was on the edge of extinction. The last remaining resistance was a scattered band of survivors in hidden bunkers across the planet. The enemy was relentless, and had been for years. They didn't care about diplomacy or mercy. Their mission was simple: eradicate humanity, wipe the species from existence, and claim Earth's resources for their own. The Zarak had no interest in negotiation. They had done their research and judged humanity as insignificant. An evolved primate species they thought was no threat to their sprawling galactic empire. But they hadn't counted on one thing: humans fought differently. They didn't give up. They didn't know how to surrender when faced with a choice between death and fighting back. Humanity had always chosen to fight. It wasn't just a matter of survival, it was instinct, it was willpower. It was a collective burning desire to prove their worth to themselves and the universe, that they could stand against the impossible and survive. The Zarak had underestimated them. Humanity was scrappy, driven, and resourceful. They knew their technology wasn't a match for the Zarak's advanced weaponry, but they also knew the Zarak couldn't anticipate the one thing that made humans dangerous: their adaptability. The Zarak may have had superior ships and firepower, but humans had the ingenuity to turn the tide in their favor. Even when all hope seemed lost in the underground bunkers scattered across the Earth, the last of humanity's military leaders were holding onto one fragile thread of hope. Captain Erica Hall stood in front of a tattered map of the Earth, pointing to locations where remnants of humanity's military were organizing their final stand. She could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. Every decision felt like it could be their last, the last chance to stop the invasion or die trying. Hall had been through countless battles during the war, but nothing had prepared her for the scale of this fight, this final battle. She was the last hope for humanity. It wasn't just her life on the line, but the lives of everyone left on Earth. The pressure was suffocating, but she wouldn't back down. She couldn't. The remnants of humanity's fleet were small, cobbled together from old ships salvaged from the ruins of their former strength. Each ship had been painstakingly restored and retrofitted with the best weapons humanity could muster. Still, they were no match for the Zarak Armada, a fleet of colossal warships that could level cities in an instant. But Captain Hall was no stranger to odds like these. He had fought in the shadows for years, leading her crew through impossible situations with nothing more than their courage and quick thinking. And now it was time to take the fight directly to the Zarak forces. She had learned from their past mistakes. Humanity was too fractured, too weak to face the Zarak head-on in a conventional battle. But the Zarak had no idea what they were walking into. They underestimated the humans' ability to fight back with nothing but their wits and determination. In the darkened war rooms of Earth's last strongholds, Captain Hall gathered the remaining resistance leaders and made her plan clear. They were going to make the Zarak bleed for every inch of ground they took. They were going to make them regret ever stepping foot on this planet. They were going to show the Zarak what it truly meant to fight humanity's war. For years, the Zarak had mocked humans, calling them weak and primitive. But then they started noticing something strange. No matter how many cities they destroyed, the humans kept fighting back, refusing to surrender. In every corner of the planet, survivors rose up from the ashes of their ruined homes and began to organize. It wasn't the advanced weaponry of the Zarak that made them nervous. It was the human spirit. It was the refusal to accept their fate. When the Zarak crushed one city, another would rise and take its place like a phoenix from the fire. They had underestimated the humans' belief in their own survival instinct. They had thought that after the first few defeats, humanity would buckle and beg for mercy. But humans had a gift that the Zarak could not comprehend. They had the ability to endure beyond reason. When a human was backed into a corner, their fight didn't just come from training or strategy. It came from something deeper, something primal, something that couldn't be measured by the Zarak's cold calculations. As the Zarak continued their war, they realized that the humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to preserve something they couldn't understand, to protect their way of life, their world, their future. This was more than a war. This was an existential struggle. The Zarak began to feel the pressure mounting in their ranks as the humans started to adapt to their technology, quickly learning how to hack into their systems, exploit their weaknesses. They couldn't simply overwhelm humanity with force any longer. They had to adapt too. The Zarak learned that humanity didn't need the most advanced weapons, they just needed the will to make anything work with whatever they had, and the humans could turn anything into a weapon, be it an old tank or a piece of scrap metal, or even a malfunctioning piece of alien technology. Once thought useless, the humans saw opportunity in everything. And that terrified the Zarek. The resistance fighters on Earth had become experts in guerrilla tactics. They would hit and run sabotage supply lines, destroy outposts, and disappear into the shadows before the Zarek had a chance to retaliate. Each victory, no matter how small, was a blow to the Zarek's overwhelming confidence. But it wasn't just the soldiers who fought, it was the civilians too. Scientists, engineers, teachers, and farmers all came together to contribute to the war effort in ways the Zarek could never have imagined. They turned factories into weapons plants and makeshift labs into research centers. They turned classrooms into training grounds for the next generation of warriors. Every human on Earth, regardless of their background, had a part to play, and every victory was celebrated not just as a step towards survival, but as a testament to the resilience of the human race. The Zarek had been so focused on their superior technology, their larger fleets, their endless resources, that they had never considered the one thing that could defeat them: a species that would not be broken, that would not bend or bow. And every time they underestimated humanity, they lost a little bit more of the war. The humans were learning fast. They were learning how to fight back in ways the Zarek couldn't anticipate, how to use every advantage, no matter how small, to flip the balance of power in their favor. The Zarek might have had their ships, their weapons, and their vast empire, but they didn't understand the heart of humanity, the one thing they could never defeat. Captain Erica Hall stood before the tattered map of Earth, tracing her finger along the points where humanity had held its ground. The map was dotted with red X, marking the places where the resistance had fought tooth and nail to survive, the cities where the Zarek had struck hardest, but still the humans had fought back. The map was more than just a chart of devastation. It was a testament to the sheer will of humanity. Each line and mark was a story of survival and resistance. Even as the Zarek's invasion grew fiercer and more ruthless, the spirit of humanity remained unbroken. Hall knew that these marks were not just the locations of past battles. They were the foundation of humanity's fight for a future. They would not surrender to the alien invaders. As she stood there, the pressure of the moment weighed heavily on her shoulders. The remnants of humanity's fleet had been cobbled together from scraps of old warships salvaged from Earth's military past. They were a far cry from the advanced ships of the Zarek fleet. Each vessel was a patchwork of outdated tech and modern upgrades, yet they were humanity's last line of defense. Hall could feel the weight of this final stand pressing against her chest. It wasn't just her life that was on the line, it was the fate of the entire human race. This fleet might be small and battered, but it was all they had, and they would fight with everything they could muster. If it came down to it, they would die fighting. But they would not die without taking as many of the Zarek down with them. The crew aboard the ships shared her resolve. They had seen the destruction that the Zarek had wrought on Earth. They had lost friends, families, entire cities. And they were not going to let that loss be in vain. Each person aboard those ships was fighting not just for survival, but for revenge, and for the future of humanity. They had nothing left to lose, but their determination was enough to carry them through even the darkest of times. They knew what was at stake. If they failed, Earth would be lost to the Zarek. But if they succeeded, they would not only save their world, they would send a message across the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, that they would not bow to any empire, no matter how powerful it might be. In the war rooms, the final battle plans were drawn up, and Hall addressed the commanders of the resistance. There was no time for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. They were going to strike the heart of the Zarek fleet. While it was still in orbit above Earth's atmosphere, they would launch a surprise attack, a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the war. Hall's voice was steady, but her mind was racing. She had thought of every possible angle and contingency plan. But in the end, it all came down to one thing: bravery. No amount of preparation could guarantee success. It was the human spirit that would decide the outcome of this fight. It was the knowledge that against all odds they would rise together or fall together. And if they were going to fall, they would make sure the Zarek knew they had faced the wrath of humanity before they did. The Zarek fleet descended upon Earth Like a storm of destruction, their ships darkening the sky with their size and sheer force, humanity's final defense was ready. But outnumbered, they could not hope to match the Zarek's overwhelming firepower in open combat. Yet they had learned the art of war. From necessity, humanity had fought wars for centuries and had learned to survive by using its enemy's strengths against them. The Zarek had relied on their advanced technology to crush human resistance. But what they didn't understand was that humanity was a creature of survival. It adapted when it needed to and found new ways to fight back where others would have given up. The resistance fleet was small, but filled with soldiers who would rather die than surrender. They were the remnants of Earth's military, gathered from the ashes of war-torn cities and rural hideouts. They weren't the best equipped, but they had something the Zarek couldn't replicate: a fierce will to live and a bond that ran deeper than any weapon. Hall stood at the helm of the flagship, staring out at the approaching alien fleet. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was calm. It had to be. There was no room for hesitation. Now they had prepared for this moment for years, gathering every scrap of intel they could find, studying the Zarek's tactics and weaknesses. They had infiltrated their systems, learned how to exploit their tech. Humanity had grown used to the art of sabotage and guerrilla warfare. It was time to put that knowledge into practice. Hall's voice rang out across the comms channels, giving orders to the fleet. She knew they couldn't afford a direct assault. It would be suicide. But she wasn't asking for a miracle, just a moment of opportunity. They would hit the Zarek where they were most vulnerable, their supply lines and command centers. The humans would strike, quickly disappear into the shadows before the Zarek had a chance to retaliate. Hall's fingers tightened around the controls of the ship as the fleet began to move into position. The first wave was a distraction, a hit-and-run attack that would draw the Zarek's attention away from the main fleet. It was risky, but necessary. In the chaos of the initial assault, they would strike fast and hit hard, finding gaps in the enemy's defenses and exploiting them as quickly as possible. If they could take down even one of the Zarek's command ships, it would send shockwaves through their forces and give the humans a fighting chance. Hall's thoughts raced, but her eyes never left the view ahead. The stars flickered as the fleet moved into position. The tension was palpable. She could hear the crew in the background working in perfect sync, their focus unshakable. No one spoke, but everyone knew their role. The time had come to prove that humanity was not just a species of survivors, but a species capable of victory. They would take the fight to the Zarek and make them regret underestimating the humans for all these years in the distance. The Zarek ships loomed closer, their weapons poised and ready. The humans' plan was simple: strike first, be swift, be precise, and be gone before the Zarek could retaliate. They weren't expecting humanity to fight this way. The Zarek were used to crushing their enemies with overwhelming force and numbers. They had no idea what they were about to face. When the battle began, the humans would show them the true power of their spirit and their ability to turn the impossible into the possible. As the Zarek fleet loomed closer, Hall's heart raced, but she remained calm. Her mind was sharp and focused. She had spent years preparing for this moment, and now the time had come to turn humanity's last chance into something more than just a desperate fight. It was a fight for survival, but it was also a fight for honor and a declaration that humanity would not be erased from the stars. The first wave of ships, led by Commander Lucas Ward, moved into position. Their task was to draw the Zarek forces toward them, to create a diversion while Hall's ship and the main fleet slipped into the heart of the enemy formation. They couldn't afford to be seen as weak. If they were going to survive, they had to be swift and deadly. The moment the signal was given, Ward's ships opened fire, sending waves of energy blasts toward the Zarek cruisers. Their ships were outdated compared to the Zarek's, but they still packed a punch. The humans hit fast and hard with everything they had, their ships darting in and out of the enemy fire like agile predators, slipping through gaps in the Zarek's formation. Ward's voice crackled over the comms loud and clear. This is just a taste of what's to come. Keep pushing them back. Make them chase us. As the first wave drew the Zarek away from their fleet, the humans moved quickly to their next target. Hall gave the order, and the remaining fleet moved forward. They had no time to waste. They would strike the command ships and communications centers first. If they could disrupt the Zarek's ability to coordinate, they would have a chance at winning this fight. The humans weren't just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with their minds, using every bit of knowledge they had gained from their years of resistance. They knew the Zarek's command system inside and out. They knew how to exploit the flaws in their communication network. They weren't just outnumbered, they were outgunned. But the Zarek didn't understand that humanity had a way of making the impossible work. As the fleet moved deeper into enemy lines, Hall's mind raced. She had trained for this moment. But nothing could have prepared her for the sheer scale of the battle. The Zarek ships towered over them, their weapons flashing as they retaliated against the first wave. Humanity had no illusions this would be easy. It would be messy and costly. But it was their only shot at survival. Hall kept her focus on the mission, knowing that one mistake could cost them everything. As they neared the first Zarek command vessel, she saw the flash of laser fire streaking across the sky. Their ships were closing in on the target. The plan was simple: overwhelm the command ship with firepower and disable its engines. Once it was disabled, the fleet could take control of the battlefield. If they could take down the heart of the Zarek's operations, it would throw their entire fleet into disarray. Hall's hands gripped the controls tighter than ever. Before, she wasn't afraid, she wasn't nervous. She was determined. They had no other choice. They had to make this count. The comms rang with the voices of her crew. Everyone knew their role and executed it flawlessly. They fired on the Zarek's flagship, targeting its shields and weapon systems, their missiles and energy blasts slamming into the hull, sending shockwaves through the enemy ship. It was working. The Zarek were momentarily stunned as their once unbeatable ship began to show signs of vulnerability. But Hall knew they couldn't let up now. This was their one and only chance. If they failed, the entire human race would pay the price. The Zarek flagship shook under the barrage of human fire, its shields flickering as blasts of energy slammed into its hull. Hall watched in silence, a heart thundering in her chest, as she gave the order for another round of fire. It wasn't enough yet, not nearly enough. The Zarek had been caught off guard, but they were regrouping quickly. Their fleet began to respond with coordinated strikes, targeting the human ships with brutal precision. They had underestimated the humans once, but that was a mistake it wouldn't make again. The Zarek were relentless, and now that they understood the threat humanity posed, they fought back with everything they had. Hall could see the Zarek forces beginning to adapt to their tactics. They weren't just relying on brute force anymore. They were moving in formations, using their superior technology to create crushing volleys of fire from every direction. It felt like the entire sky was burning with the force of their weapons. Yet Hall never wavered. The humans had learned how to survive by being unpredictable, by thinking outside the box, by using their enemies' strengths against them. Humanity wasn't going to fight the Zarek's war. Humanity was going to fight their own war. It wasn't just about strength. It was about speed, about timing, about pushing past the limits of what should be possible against impossible odds. As the battle raged on, Hall's mind moved faster than ever. She needed to think beyond the here and now. They couldn't just survive this fight. They had to win it. They had to hit them where it hurt the most. The Zarek's strength was their advanced technology, but humanity had learned to turn that very strength into a weakness. Their ships were fast and powerful, but they were vulnerable in places. The Zarek didn't even realize their communications were being intercepted and scrambled. Their shield systems were being overloaded by interference from the human fleet's makeshift tech. Hall knew this was their advantage. If they could keep the Zarek disoriented for just a little longer, they could finish the job. She glanced at the tactical display, seeing the flickering red lights. As the Zarek's response began to pick up speed, the humans had to move quickly or they would lose the initiative. But that's when the real breakthrough came. Commander Ward's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got a breach in their supply lines. We've cut off their reinforcements. The big ships are isolated." Hall felt a surge of hope flood through her. She knew this was their moment. The Zarek had relied on their vast fleet to overwhelm humanity, but now they were exposed. They had no backup, and their ships were beginning to slow without reinforcements to support them. The Zarek fleet was stretched thin, but humanity's fighters didn't stop. They pressed forward with a renewed sense of urgency, hitting the enemy where it hurt most. They knew the Zarek would fight until the bitter end, but the humans were ready for it. They wouldn't relent now, not when they were so close. It was a turning point in the battle, and Hall could feel the weight of it on her shoulders. If they didn't capitalize on this opportunity, now they might never get another one. The Zarek were powerful, yes, but their arrogance had blinded them to the one thing humanity had that they couldn't anticipate: the ability to adapt on the fly, to learn in the heat of battle, and use that knowledge to survive at any cost. Humanity wasn't here to just win this fight, they were here to prove that they had the strength to take on an empire and bring it to its knees, no matter the odds. With the Zarek fleet reeling from the disruption in their supply lines and reinforcements cut off, humanity's forces pressed forward, their ships moving faster now as the tide of battle began to shift in their favor. All's breath came in steady but deep inhales as she watched the battlefield unfold. Before her, the Zarek were scrambling, their once imposing formations were falling apart, their ships now scattered and vulnerable. The humans were relentless, their fighters darting through gaps in the Zarek's defenses, striking with precision, and then vanishing into the darkness of space before the Zarek could retaliate. Every move was calculated, every attack timed to perfection. But even as they gained ground, Hall knew the Zarek would not simply retreat, they would adapt. They always did. The Zarek Emperor was not one to take defeat lightly. Hall had heard the stories of his cold ruthlessness, his strategic genius. She knew this would not be the end. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. She glanced at the display of her flagship's condition. The hull was scorched and dented from the constant barrage of enemy fire. But it was holding together, for now their ships were battered too. But the human crew held firm, their focus unwavering, as the battle raged on. The final push was coming, and Hall knew they had to be ready for it. If the Zarek brought everything they had left to bear on Earth, the humans would need every ounce of their strength and every piece of their ingenuity to survive. Hall turned to the communications officer. Prepare for the final assault. Get all ships into position. We need to hit their command ships hard now. The officer nodded and relayed the orders across the fleet. Within moments, the fleet was realigning, moving in sync with Hall's command. It was time to strike the heart of the Zarek's operation and cut the head off the serpent. If they could take down the Zarek Emperor's flagship, if they could sever his command from the rest of the fleet, the remaining Zarek forces would collapse like a house of cards. Hall knew this wasn't a certainty, but it was their best chance, their only chance. As the human fleet moved into position, the Zarek responded with a furious counterattack, their ships regrouping and launching a concentrated assault on the humans' weakened positions. Hall's crew fought with everything they had, their weapons flashing with a fury that could match any force in the galaxy. Humanity's fighters dove into the fray, using the enemy's formations against them. They exploited every gap and weakness, every blind spot in the Zarek's defense systems. It was chaotic, but it was working. Humanity was starting to break the Zarek's grip on space inch by inch. As Hall's flagship neared the heart of the Zarek fleet, she could see it in the distance. The enormous flagship of the Zarek Emperor itself, its sheer size and power dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. It loomed like a dark monolith among the stars, surrounded by a swarm of smaller ships that acted as its shield. The humans had no illusions this would be easy. It would be the hardest fight of their lives. But it was a fight they had to win. They had to destroy the Zarek Emperor's flagship, or the humans would lose everything. Hall clenched her fists. The plan was simple: get close to the flagship, disable its weapons, and then breach its core systems and destroy it from the inside. But there was no room for error. One mistake could lead to the destruction of the entire human fleet. They had one shot, and it had to be perfect. The human fleet moved forward with relentless precision. The flagship of the Zarek Emperor loomed ever closer, its dark form dominating the field of stars ahead. The Zarek were aware of their presence, and they were closing ranks around the massive vessel, their smaller ships moving in tight formations to shield the Emperor's flagship from any possible attack. Hall's eyes were locked onto the target. Her heart raced, but her mind was as sharp as ever. This was the moment. Everything had led up to the plan was set, and there would be no turning back now. The human fleet had one final advantage. The Zarek were overconfident. They believed the humans had no chance against their might, and that arrogance would be their undoing. Hall knew the Zarek hadn't prepared for this kind of fight. They hadn't prepared for the humans to exploit their weaknesses so thoroughly, and now it was time to finish what they had started. As the fleet continued its approach, Hall watched the comms channel filled with voices of her crew and the commanders of the resistance. They were all in this together, each person giving everything they had to ensure success. Hall could feel the weight of it all pressing on her shoulders. But she knew this was their only shot. If they didn't succeed, the entire human race would fall. The Zarak would wipe them out and claim the Earth for their own. She felt the tension building in the silence that followed, each passing second closer to the most dangerous moment of the war. Every crew member on board, every fighter pilot, every technician was ready to give their all. The first wave of fighters launched their attack, diving toward the Zarak's shield perimeter. With deadly intent, their lasers and missiles cutting through the blackness of space. They were a distraction, a signal to the rest of the fleet to close in on the Emperor's flagship. Hall gave the command to move in. All ships adjusted their trajectories, simultaneously shifting into formation as they prepared for the final assault. The enemy ships returned fire with a fury, but the humans were ready, their agility and maneuverability proving superior as they dodged and countered the blasts. The energy shields on the human ships were cracking under the constant bombardment, but they held long enough for the plan to unfold. Hall's ship led the charge, her crew moving with perfect coordination. Everything depended on getting through the Zarak's shield perimeter without being destroyed. It was a gauntlet of fire. Every passing second felt like a lifetime, the human ships weaving between beams of energy and blasts of plasma. Hall's pulse quickened as the gap between the human fleet and the Zarak flagship closed. She could see the massive ship, now close enough to touch its sheer size, almost overwhelming, but the humans had come too far to hesitate now. With a sharp command, Hall ordered her ship to split from the formation and make a break toward the Zarak flagship. They would breach its defenses from the side, exploiting the weakness the humans had learned about its hull. The Zarak flagship was imposing, but it wasn't invulnerable. Its sheer size made it difficult to protect every inch of its surface. There were gaps in its armor and blind spots in its weapon systems that the humans could exploit. The ships around them continued to fire on the Zarak's smaller ships, creating a diversion. As Hall's ship closed in on its target, the tension was unbearable. Hall watched as they approached the Zarak flagship, moving into position for the breach. The countdown was on, and the moment to strike was fast approaching. They were so close to ending this war, to giving humanity a chance to survive. Hall could hear the roar of energy blasts filling the comms channel, the pressure rising as the battle reached its peak. But they had no choice. There was no turning back now. It was do or die. The breach was imminent. Hall's hands gripped the controls with a force that almost hurt her knuckles as her ship darted toward the Zarak flagship, its dark surface looming ever closer with each heartbeat. The crew around her worked in perfect sync, the energy in the bridge palpable. Everyone knew their roles and their lives hung in the balance. They had trained for this moment, prepared for every possibility. And now there was no room for error. The Zarak flagship's weapons fire was relentless. But the humans were faster. They moved in tight, evasive maneuvers, slipping past blast after blast. Hall could see the gaps in the ship's shields, now the moments of vulnerability, and she knew exactly where to strike. Their ship was big and slow to adjust, but it had one crucial weakness: it couldn't cover everything at once. Their shields were powerful, but they were stretched thin. The Zarak flagship had been designed to dominate, not to fight a war of attrition. The humans had done the impossible. They had forced the Zarak into a position where they could no longer hide their flaws. The Zarak had underestimated humanity in every way, but now they were learning too late. Hall's ship surged forward with incredible speed, the breach point in sight. She could see the vulnerability in the side of the flagship's hull, a weak point where its armor was thinner than the rest. With a sharp intake of breath, she gave the order to fire. They hit the target with pinpoint accuracy. A series of explosive charges erupted along the side of the flagship, tearing through the hull. With a deafening sound, the ship groaned and shuddered as the blast sent shockwaves through the interior. Alarms blade on the comms signaling the Zarak's panic. Hall's heart raced with adrenaline as her ship sliced through the explosion zone, the bridge shaking with the impact. The crew braced themselves for the next stage of the attack. They had breached the flagship's outer defenses. Now it was time to disable its core systems. They couldn't waste a second. If they hesitated now, the Zarak would regroup and retaliate with everything they had. It was now or never. Hall knew the risk they were taking to board the flagship was enormous, but there was no other way. They had to get inside, disable the command systems, and take down the Zarak Emperor's control center. From within, her mind raced with the calculations for their next move. She knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before the Zarak launched their counterattack. And at that moment, every second counted. The bridge crew continued to work with laser-like focus, their fingers moving across the controls with practiced precision. They rerouted power to the shields, giving them just enough time to break through the next layer of defense. Hall could hear the sound of Zarek ships closing in, but they were too late. The humans were already inside. The breach was open, and Hall ordered the secondary ships to deploy their boarding teams. These soldiers were humanity's last hope, their chance to bring the fight straight to the heart of the Zarek war machine. The sound of boots hitting the Zarek flagship's metal floors echoed through the comms as the boarding teams moved swiftly through the breach, their weapons at the ready as they engaged the Zarek forces in close quarters combat. The fight was brutal. The humans were outnumbered, but they were fueled by sheer determination and desperation. They fought like animals, defending their homes like warriors, protecting everything they had ever known. As the battle inside the flagship raged, Hall remained at the helm, focused on her crew and the next step in their plan. She didn't have time to worry about the soldiers on board. She had to keep the fleet alive. She had to make sure the humans would survive this last push. The battle inside the Zarek flagship was chaos. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the dark metallic corridors as humanity's boarding teams fought their way toward the heart of the ship, where the Zarek Emperor's command center lay. Every step forward was hard-earned and costly. The humans pushed forward with every ounce of strength they had. The Zarek forces were fierce, but they were disorganized. Their command systems were down, their communications scrambled by the sabotage humans had inflicted earlier. The Zarek were losing their grip on the ship, and with it their will to fight. The humans didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. They had come too far to falter now. Every soldier knew that their sacrifice would mean everything to the survival of the human race. They fought not for themselves, but for their families, their homes, their future. Each bullet fired was a promise that humanity would endure no matter the cost. Hall's voice came through the comms, steady and unwavering. Hold the line, don't let them push you back. As the soldiers advanced deeper into the flagship, they encountered fierce resistance. But the Zarek were no longer coordinated. Their once impressive formations had devolved into frantic last-ditch attempts to protect the heart of the ship. The humans tore through them with relentless precision. The breach teams had secured the command center, and now all that was left was to finish what they had started. The Zarek Emperor was in his control room, surrounded by his most trusted lieutenants and warriors. But it was too late for them. The humans had won the fight outside, and now they would finish the war. Hall knew this was the final moment. There could be no second chances. The soldiers reached the inner sanctum of the Emperor's command center and breached the door with a deafening crash. The Zarek within had no time to react. The humans stormed in, guns raised, and fired. The room was filled with the sound of gunfire and explosions as the Zarek soldiers attempted to mount a defense. But it was futile. The humans were faster and more determined. They cut through the Zarek's last line of defense and reached the Emperor himself. The Zarek ruler stood tall and unyielding, his alien eyes narrowed in disbelief as he saw the humans breaking through the final defenses. Hall's team made their way toward him, weapons aimed. The Emperor's defiance faltered for just a moment, and in that instant Hall knew the fight was over. The Zarek had finally met their match. The humans had shattered their empire from the inside out. With the Emperor's death, the Zarek would crumble, their forces would disband, and their hold on Earth would be no more. Hall's team surrounded the Emperor. The gunfire ceased as they held their positions. The room was silent except for the sound of labored breathing. The Emperor glared at them with unblinking eyes, but he did not speak. His power had failed. His arrogance had been his undoing. Hall's voice broke the silence as she stepped forward. "This is the end," she said calmly. The Zarek Emperor stared at her for a long moment. Then he finally spoke, his voice a low hiss. "You will not win. The galaxy is vast, and you are nothing." Hall looked him in the eye, unflinching. "We are everything." With that, the humans executed their final strike against the Zarek Emperor. His reign ended with the pull of a trigger, and the command center fell into silence. Humanity's victory had come at a cost, but it had come. The war was over. The Zarek were no more, and Earth had been saved. But the future was uncertain. The humans had won, but now they had to rebuild and reclaim what was theirs. Their survival had proven one thing: humanity was resilient, and they would never be forgotten.